continue our lesson 4.8 on dependent and independent variables. If you look at workbook page 55, the first part asks us to identify independent variable and dependent variables in each situation. So again, thinking about which thing depends on the other. If we look at the first question, we have the number of hours H spent studying and the score on a test. So we want to think about which one depends on the other. So we could say the number of hours we study depends on what we get, or what we get on the test depends on how many hours we study. And usually when we say it both ways, one of those hopefully makes more sense to you, and hopefully it was the second one. So dependent variable would be the score. Independent variable would be the number of hours spent studying. Okay, because your score depends on the studying. And like I've said before, usually what comes first is independent, and then what happens next is dependent. So first you study, then you take the test and get a score. Number 2, our variables, we have the length of a pencil and the number of times it has been sharpened. And so for that one, independent would be the times it has been sharpened, and dependent would be the length of the pencil. Length of the pencil depends on how many times we've sharpened it. Number 3, length of a story in pages and the number of words in a story. So we could say the number of pages depends on the number of words, or the number of words depends on the number of pages. And it would be the pages depends on the words. Okay, we write the words, and then that's going to decide how many pages long the story is going to be. Number 4, number of students ahead of you in the lunch line and the time it takes you to get lunch. So students ahead of you depends on how long it takes you to get to lunch, or the time it takes you to lunch depends on the number of students ahead of you. Second one sounds good. So in this case, dependent is going to be the time it takes you to get to lunch, and independent is going to be the number of students ahead of you. So this is another one of those exceptions where time is actually the dependent variable here again. Amount of time to finish a race and the number of laps around the track. In this case, dependent would be the time to finish the race, and independent is the laps around the track. So how long it takes you to finish the race depends on how many laps you have to make. Number 6, the tickets sold for each race and the amount of money collected. You'll have to sell the tickets before you can get the money, so dependent is going to be the money, independent is going to be the tickets sold. The money you collect depends on how many tickets you sold. Number 7, the length L of a fence and the amount of wood W to make the fence. Well, we're going to need wood first in order to make the fence. So independent would be the amount of wood, and dependent would be the length of the fence. And when they're doing these, I'm not a big fan of how they're doing these L's. Make it a cursive L so it doesn't look like a 1 would be a good choice. Technically could do a capital L also, just they usually do lowercase letters for whatever reason. And number 8, the height of a fence and the time it takes to climb the fence. So time it takes to climb the fence is going to be dependent on the height of the fence. And a lot of these you might be saying, well, we're getting all kinds of problems where time is dependent, and that's true. Notice most of the cases are that the time it's taking to do something, though. Okay, how long it takes to do something depends on what you're being asked to do, basically. Number 9 asks you to write your own situation, which the speed S is an independent variable. Lots of things you could come up with. What the book came up as a sample would be the time it takes to walk to school and the speed I walk. So, you know, how long it's going to take you to get to school depends how fast you're walking. Makes sense. So the speed is independent. The time it's going to take is dependent. Number 10, name at least 2 independent variables that could result in a change in a monthly cell phone bill. So some different options, and you can see some of this is becoming a little dated. Number of texts sent and the amount of data used. Other options mentioned included how many phones were on the plan and how much you're using it, which is kind of goes along the same lines. I know a lot of plans anymore, they're going towards unlimited text, maybe even unlimited data, although they can slow your speed down if you are using a whole bunch of data. But I mean, it used to be a commonplace when texting first came out that you were charged per text. So it was maybe like 10 cents or a quarter per text. So you can imagine texting was not nearly as commonplace at that time because that was extra charge. So not near as commonplace as it is now. So number 11, you spend D dollars for G identical pairs of glasses. A friend claims that because D increases if you increase G, and G increases if you increase D, either D or G could be the independent variable. Is your friend correct? Well, no. There's always pretty much going to be an independent and dependent variable. So in this case, we have independent variable is going to be the number of glasses, and the dollars you're spending. Okay, basically how much you're spending depends on how many pairs of glasses you're buying, we could say. And number 12, cost of supplies for school depends on other factors. List at least 2 independent variables that could affect the cost of school supplies. So things that would affect that would be the number of things that you need, so the amount of things you buy. If it's on sale, maybe. What brand it is could be another thing that's going to affect it. Okay, sometimes certain brand is going to cost more, usually for pretty much the same thing. So number 13, 2 friends hiked the Appalachian Trail from Georgia to Maine. List at least 2 independent variables that could affect the number of days they took to hike the trail. So some different things that are going to affect this. The speed that they hike is going to affect how long it takes them. How many hours they hike each day. So, you know, are we hiking all day? Are we just hiking for an hour or 2 a day? You know, what are we doing? Other things that are going to affect this, which kind of plays into our speed. These kind of are going to affect our speed, would be the weather. Okay, like if it's nice weather versus if it's raining or snowing or stuff like that. And then also kind of the terrain, like how we use the technical word here, terrain, but it has to do with like how hilly or flat something is. So if it's hillier, we're up around the mountains area, more mountains or steeper trail, it's going to take a little bit longer maybe, especially if you're going uphill versus downhill, stuff like that. So a lot of variables, independent variables, that's going to affect that. So number 14, Steve had S songs on his music player. He bought N new songs. What is the dependent variable? So on this, dependent variable would be S because the number of songs that he has on the music player depends on how many new songs that he bought. Number 15, a baseball team gets 3 outs for each inning it comes up to bat. So far this season, Silvio's team has batted in 45 innings and has made 135 outs. What is the dependent variable? So options are the innings or the outs. And the question, which one of those is dependent on the other one? So on this one, dependent would be the number of outs because the number of outs depends on how many innings that you bat. And some of these are a little bit maybe not as easy to tell as others, but basically you get the new inning and then you're going to be batting at some point in that inning, and then that's going to affect how many outs you're going to be able to get. For 16, number of laps you swim and the time you spend swimming. So does the number of laps depend on how long you swim, or does the time you spend swimming depend on the number of laps you swim? And in this case, the independent would be the laps and dependent would be the time. Time you spend swimming depends on how many laps that you're going to go. Makes sense. 17, Yvonne says the length L can be used either as an independent or dependent variable. Give an example which length is a dependent, then describe another situation in which it's an independent variable. So again, lots of different options you could do here. They're saying if length was an independent variable, it could be the finishing time of a runner and the length of the race. So the finishing time depends on how long the race is. Different situation. Dependent variable is the length of a song and the number of notes played. So in this case, the length of the song depends on how many notes that were played for the song. Number 18, cost C of a hamburger at a restaurant depends on other factors at the restaurant. Name 2 independent variables on which the cost of a hamburger might depend. So what kind of things are going to affect the cost of our hamburger? So the size of the hamburger, quality of the meat are the 2 options the book gives. Another thing would be toppings that you use. Okay, a lot of times even a hamburger versus a cheeseburger. I guess they call it a hamburger, so maybe there's no cheese here. But anyway, that's extra, usually 25 cents, 50 cents maybe for a piece of cheese. Something like that. Or all the toppings, does it have onions or bacon or different things on it? It's going to make it cost more, stuff like that. Also, a location that you buy it is another option that we talked about here. If you're in Indiana versus in New York, different costs of living, different costs of items in different spots. So Indiana is probably going to be cheaper than in New York for that same hamburger. And then part B, they want us to identify the dependent variable and independent variable. Owner of Arlo's Hamburger Hut records the total income from hamburger sales S and the total number of hamburgers sold H. So we got to think about, does our income going to depend on the hamburgers sold, or is the number of hamburgers sold going to depend on our income? And for this, dependent would be S. So our income depends on how many hamburgers we sold. Again, we have to sell the hamburgers first, and then we start getting income. We start getting money off of those sales. Okay, so this gives you an idea of how to work with dependent and independent variables.